Thank you very much. Right, can I ask that we, when we're not talking, we silence our mics so we don't get any background noise. So we've had no apologies for absence. I will work on the assumption that Tanya will just keep us up to date as we go through the meeting as to where we are. Any declarations of interest from anybody based on what we have on the agenda? Good, I'll assume that to be a no. The minutes, I've been through the minutes and have made some recommendations which Tanya's built in. Has everybody had a chance to look at those? And has anybody got any views or comments or questions they want to raise? I'm going to throw the ball at you, Ram, because you're normally fairly good at having something.
Chair, I did look at them obviously some times ago, so it seems to be correct record. That's the first part to say. I don't see anything left behind, which is I think circulated later on some of the issues. I think there was one issue which was raised and that was brought into email later on. So I don't think there's anything left behind to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Ram. So can I have everybody's approval to sign these off? Good, thank you very much. Good morning, Alex. Nice to see you. All right, then Chair's remarks. I've only got a couple of things I just want to mention. You'll notice on the agenda and the size of the paper and the pack, there's a lot of the reports this time around are verbal. Tim and I had agreed that with an awful lot of material, a lot of what's going on within the combined authority being very fluid, it seemed a little daft for me to get written reports on updates like the assurance and the strategic risk register too heavily written in print, and that we will be getting verbal updates because these things are changing on a regular basis. Clearly, we will move back into a more paper-based format as soon as we can. I hope you'll forgive me and support that, but it just means that we can have our reports very up to date because people haven't had to prepare them 2 or 3 weeks in advance. So I think I can see most people nodding heads. Let me know if anybody feels unhappy with that. Secondly, we had last time round, we had data protection and we due an update in the January meeting. I seem to recall, and a number of you will remember this from history, that we also had cybersecurity last on the agenda, probably about 18 months, slightly, maybe approaching 2 years ago. Those two subjects, especially in lockdown, Tim and I have discussed this and with his colleagues, and the intention is that in January we will come back either as 2 separate reports, but at the same time, an update on where we are on cybersecurity, as well as the update we requested on data protection. The purpose behind that is that those of you, and I can only think of a couple of you who were here right at the very beginning of our act starting, was that cybersecurity causes a bit of headache early on. We weren't really on top of it, and I don't think we've seen it really since we were satisfied, probably about 18 months, 2 years ago. So it is timely to have an update on that. That really is all I wanted to say. I think I'd like to just, Tanya waved a hand at me, so I think you want to just update me on attendance. Tanya? Okay, thank you. So Tim, would you like to cover off the areas, the 3 areas that you've listed there, or 2 of them, and then Linda the 3rd one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just the usual update on whistleblowing. There are 2 matters that are under investigation. They're in fact the same 2 matters that have been reported previously. The Chair has been updated and will be updated again shortly in terms of the investigations. And that's all that I can say at the moment on that. Just a brief comment on the exit payments. Elected members may well be aware, others may also be aware, that the government have for a long time indicated their intention to place a cap on public sector exit payments. This has now been approved and comes into effect on the 4th of November. So the legislation has finally been approved through secondary legislation. So this is just a very brief update for members of the committee, just to reassure you that we are aware of this, that the WMCA has measures in place to cover this and make sure that it's managed going forward in the case of any exit payments. What it means in effect is that with regard to any exit payments that are paid to departing staff for whatever reason, there is an overall £5,000, and so that will include any payments, whether they be for voluntary redundancy or statutory redundancy payments, any other contractual payments, payments in lieu of notice, and any what are generally called pension strain payments. So, for instance, if somebody is leaving over the age of 55, when a pension might become any payments being made into the pension fund to compensate for the early payment of pension. So all of those must not add up to more than £95,000. So it may not, in fact, be 95k that's actually going to the individual directly, but obviously it does also include pension payments. In regards to pensions, I understand that there is still work to be done in terms of harmonising the regulations around pension and around the exit caps. Obviously, the pension regulations, it's a statutory regime as well. So I think there's still work to be done on that. I understand that Rachel Brothwood is actually going to be giving a presentation shortly. She may be able to update you on that. So we'll work with the pension fund to make sure that works out okay. But this is just an update, really, Chair, just to make sure that the committee receives the assurance that we're aware of that and we're taking measures to implement it.
Thank you. Any questions from anybody on that? No. Linda, I think you've got a quick update on where we are on the Treasury Management strategy, and I presume about the support that ARAC may get.
Yes, so just to say, you had a discussion last time on the Treasury Management strategy. What we've agreed with David is that what we will do is take the same approach as we do with the annual accounts, which is before you're presented with the Treasury Management strategy for review, we will have some training and sort of a presentation from our independent Treasury advisors, Arlene Close, who will come in, take you through the main aspects of Treasury management and highlight for you the key points and the key risks that you as members would need to be aware of and to be looking at. And then what will lead into then is the session in January that looks at our Treasury Management strategy that we're putting forward for the next financial year. So the aim is that as you are on the account supported by Grant Thornton, you'll be supported on the Treasury Management strategy by Arlene Close.
Thank you, Linda. Alex, you have a question.
I'm getting the microphone to work there. Yes, Linda, just on the January session, if we can include a discussion about negative interest rates and what the possible impacts of that would be to us, that'd be appreciated. I don't know if you've got any thoughts would you like to go and give to us now?
Yes, we've already seen that DMO are offering sort of negative interest rates for investments of less than 3 weeks. So we're certainly managing our treasury currently, ensuring that I'm not having to pay government to hold our money. But yeah, so that will form part of that update. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Tanya, you've got your hand up. Lovely, thank you, Tanya. Thanks for that. I'm just quickly checking around. I haven't seen any other hands. No. So let's move on to the forward plan. Does anybody have any comments on what's actually in the paper pack? And Tanya, do you want to add anything to what you've circulated? So any hands up or questions anybody wants to raise? No. Can I ask colleagues, I think we probably could do with having an update, it may well be a verbal update from Tim, at the January meeting on the mayoral election, the forthcoming mayoral election and the preparations, so that we have an insight into whether there are any imminent issues, and also really in comparison to the audit report we had after the last election, have all the lessons been learned? Tim, would you be happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And colleagues, are you okay if we just have a quick verbal update on preparations? And the other one is this committee used to be called Audit and Standards. It was originally Audit and Standards in the Constitution before we changed it to Audit, Risk and Assurance. Standards are assumed to be covered for all members, really, through your memberships of your own local authorities, or in the case of someone like Sean through his professional body. What we did, I think, about 18 months, 2 years ago, is we reviewed where we were with standards. And I think, Tim, it might be worth us while putting in either in the January or the April meeting an update again for ARIC to understand where we are with the standards. Tim?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, happy to do that. As members may be aware, the Local Government Association at the moment are consulting on a revised code of conduct. That's taken, as these things often do, has taken longer than expected, but obviously there will be a need for us to review our code of conduct when that draft model code is published. So that might be timely in January, depending on the progress of the Government Association. So yes, absolutely. Luckily, touch wood, it's not an issue that bothers us a great deal. The Combined Authority, as David as Chair has said, are just around it being mainly an issue for the individual authorities, but we do need to maintain that rigour. So I'm happy to report back.
Thank you, Tim. Ram, you had your hand up.
Yes, Chair, just to think on that, because every authority's got the code of conduct. Do we need to have a separate one ourselves? I thought that we are all covered with it. I mean, I haven't got objection to it, because I remember in our local Coventry Council meeting, we approved an updated version of code of conduct soon. So I'm not sure whether there's an extra need for it. I just want to understand that.
Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is a statutory requirement for us to have our own code of conduct. It does mirror, and we aim for it to mirror the code of conducts that are in place in the constituent and non-constituent authorities.
So I think, Tim, if we may, can I leave it to you to tell us when it's most sensible to have that update? Because there's no point in having it if the local government associations consultation hasn't been finished, but it would be worthwhile including in your remarks next time when you think it's likely to be.
Yeah.
And Tanya, can you just put that on the imminent forward list to fit in when Tim thinks it's best? Thank you. Tim, it probably would be worthwhile revisiting post the mayoral elections the standards approach that we take to non-council representatives who support the combined authority, because the mayor brings in quite a few. We had a policy where we get them to sign a code of conduct letter. I think post the election there will be a series of appointments or reappointments. I think it'd be worthwhile us revisiting that has been done satisfactorily.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Good. In which case, that brings me really to welcome Rachel, who I suspect is somewhere on the screen somewhere. I haven't found her, who's going to talk us through the West Midlands Pension Fund. If you remember, this was a long overdue update. Because there was nothing critical, we put it off on a couple of occasions because we actually had more important things to do. I put it to the top of the list because I think Rachel deserves now to have our undivided attention. Rachel, you'll have to speak before me to see you.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for making time on your agenda for us this morning. So we have a short presentation. I'll ask my colleague Jill Davies, who's also with me this morning, to share it on the screen, if that's okay. We'll talk through, I understand, David, we have about 10 minutes to just talk through some highlights and then another 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you're happy for us to make a start, we'll get going.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, yes, my name is Rachel Brothwood. I'm Director of Pensions at the West Midlands Pension Fund. I know a number of you by name, and I know a number of you have also been on our Pensions Committee. Just in terms of the West Midlands Pension Fund, I'm conscious that we have both constituent and non-constituent authorities on this committee. So just to confirm, the West Midlands Pension Fund provides the benefits for the 7 local authorities within the West Midlands area, and also the combined authority. But in total, we have just over 700 employers, as we also work with a number of education establishments, contractors across the region as well. We currently have just over 300,000 members and assets under management of the order of £16 billion. And hopefully that just is a helpful context as we undertake our role in administering the benefits and investing the assets. So if we can move on to the first slide, so there's three areas we're going to touch on very briefly this morning. The first is one that I know will have been on your radar, particularly with the audit, and that is the restructuring of the LGPS arrangements within the West Midlands area, the LGPS arrangements, which resulted in the merger of the legacy Integrated Transport Authority Pension Fund into the West Midlands Pension Fund. We're going to touch a little bit on investment strategy and climate change, and in particular what we do in this space, and also talk very briefly, about scheme change, and in particular McLeod, and I think probably exit payments has also been on your radar and agenda this morning already. So if I make a start on the first topic, we talk a little bit about the merger. So just by way of background, the WMITA pension fund, it doesn't hold the benefits for West Midlands Combined Authority employers, but it does hold the benefits for two former transport organisations and members, so National Express Bus, and also for legacy reasons Preston Bus. So it's a closed arrangement, so no new benefits build up. But as part of a review a couple of years ago, we looked at how the fund could be perhaps more streamlined in terms of its management, and put a joint proposal to CLG to merge the two funds together. The West Midlands Pension Fund having administered on a delegated basis the ITA fund for a number of years. In terms of process, close contact with Section 151 officer, monitoring officer, and regular dialogue with the Finance Directors Group. One of the big outcomes from this exercise really was a strengthening of the underlying financial guarantees and understanding of how the different parties interact when it came to liabilities. Those arrangements were formalised in terms of there was an SI statutory instrument and directions published in November 2019, and then we've been working to transfer assets and liabilities across and set up the new arrangements within the West Midlands Pension Fund, ready for the year end that we've just passed. As part of this exercise, we undertook additional audit work, in particular to look at how the asset unitisation had worked within the transport fund between the two employers, and we're expecting a clean audit report from that. The Combined Authority remains an employer within the West Midlands Pension Fund, but no longer is an administering authority, as they are defined for the purposes of administering the local government pension scheme, and that change took effect from April 2019. So our interaction with the Combined Authority now is purely in the role of employer, alongside, and as is the case for other local authorities in the West Midlands. So if we move on to look at investment strategy, and I know this is something that is an interest to a lot of people, and in particular what we do and I guess how we do it. To just summarise very briefly, we have a fairly detailed document, our investment strategy statement, something we're required to produce, but it sets out in some detail our approach to setting investment strategy and how the investments are then managed. So we take very broadly, we take a risk-based approach, which is structured around beliefs and a required risk return. We have a quarterly cycle for monitoring, reporting. We have independent oversight in the form of our independent advisory panel, and more frequently our internal investment committee meets to balance the short-term and longer-term risks. We review on an annual basis the progress made by our investment strategy, which is interlinked with our funding strategy and also our employer covenant risk framework, to ensure that the three of them work combined as an integrated risk management process. We have a dialogue ongoing with all of our employers, and in particular with the West Midlands Finance Directors Group, to look at how those strategies are working together on an annual basis, and that process has started again for this year. We independently benchmark our investments and our administration services, but investments in particular, to look at the net added value after cost. So I'm going to come on to talk a little bit about climate change, but just on the right-hand side, you'll see that climate change is part of our responsible investment framework, along with our compliance with the UK Stewardship Code and also our detailed voting principles. But I'm just going to ask Jill to give you a little bit more information about our climate work.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So we have a climate change framework and strategy. It's fair to say that I think the fund has been a fairly early adopter in terms of considering the impact and opportunities arising as a result of climate change. We developed the framework in 2019, which aligns the fund to the Paris Climate Agreement. We use an evidence-based approach, but we are looking to extend across various asset classes and also beyond investment. So we do some climate change analysis around covenant risks as well. The fund adopts a coordinated approach to climate change through engagement, believes ultimately that this is more powerful than perhaps divestment, that some companies can be as much part of the solution as the problem with the right level of engagement and encouragement to transition to a greener economy. The fund undertakes a range of activities to measure and manage climate change in a controlled and proportionate manner. This has been recognised within awards and assessments. So we got a highly commended from IPE last year for our climate change work. The fund, in its framework and strategy, sets targets, and we have made some fairly good progress on those early targets that we set in 2019. And although originally we'd been looking at reviewing that back into 2023-24, we've actually made sufficient progress to say actually we might take a review sooner than that. I think one thing to bring out is that there are definitely challenges in terms of definition and measurement. There are lots of different companies that measure climate risk, and they can come out with very different results. So we are very mindful of that. So again, trying to take a proportionate approach to how we measure those risks. Just to also bring out sort of one of the other things, we also complete the survey for the Principle for Responsible Investment, and we were really pleased earlier this year to be awarded an A star for responsible investment strategy and governance. I think just demonstrating how far advanced we are, and in terms of that, there were very few LGPS funds that actually completed that mandatory reporting. We were also one of the first funds to report in line with the Task Force for Climate Disclosures back in 2017. Increasingly, it is being seen as a benchmark on which to measure both funds and asset managers as well, with probably some mandatory reporting coming in for the private sector very shortly. Happy to take any questions at the end, but handing over to you, Rachel, for the next one.
Thanks, Jill. So just moving finally to look at scheme change and risk management more generally, and again, it probably is sort of no surprise to you that with the task that we have quite a structured approach to risk management, which incorporates both bottom up, top down, and forward looking risks, which are reviewed on a quarterly basis. This is definitely something which has supported our response to COVID, and some of the appendices contain some more information and links on exactly how we have responded, but we've done an awful lot to keep our people going, our customers informed, evolving how we interact with them, and also monitoring the financial position as well in terms of our own budget, but also more broadly the impact on the investments. So we do have an established BCP planning process, and that's part of a range of activities that we undertake to ensure that we can maintain and retain a number of accreditations from leading sort of industry, recognised industry awards. So we have our own Investors in People award, which we've had earlier this year, re-accredited at the new gold standard. We're just going through our customer services excellence accreditation again to renew that, and we work closely with the Pensions Management Institute as well. So engaging in policy development and scheme-wide change is absolutely critical to ensuring that the fund can continue to keep on top, aware of the emerging risks, and also ensure that we respond appropriately and in a timely management. And that really goes to the heart of how we are responding to some of the scheme changes that we see at the moment. There's some further slides in the appendix which I'm happy to talk to, but two big things on our horizon at the minute. One is the implementation of the cloud. So this is looking at how benefit changes, which were implemented back in 2014, are now deemed to be age discriminatory. So we need to go back and look again at the benefits that people have built up and recorded within the scheme. And we estimate that around 1 in 4 of scheme members, so 75,000 member records, will need to be revisited to account for that change. We have developed a structured programme to work through the technical, the communications, the systems side of that to ensure that we can implement that in a timely manner. We've been proactive in engaging in the consultation response on that, and we know where we need to work and how we need to interact with our employers. We've been working to develop a standard data template to make that side of the process as easy as possible, but ultimately ensure that once we're able and we've got all the information to implement, we will be doing that in a timely manner. We're keeping our employers and our members informed. And that's really part of a toolkit that we're also working on when it comes to wider changes, more immediate changes, whereas McLeod will be a 2 to 3 year exercise. The more immediate change that we're working on at the minute is around the exit cap and how changes to the HMT regulations interact with the LGPS regulations, and what the scheme can do and what the fund can do in the context of our role, which is to facilitate the decision making of employers and members at some fairly challenging times. So if we can move to the next slide, Jill, I think we just about had our 10 minutes. So as I say, we've touched on quite a broad range of things there. Happy to delve into in a little bit more detail, but just for context, Jill and I form part of a team, senior management team of 7 at the fund, each of whom has their own area of specialisms, and happy to talk to you this morning about any further detail you'd like. Thank you. In terms of questions, Chair, do you want to call them out, or shall I look at the order?
I'm happy to call them out. Thanks, Rachel. Alex, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, Chair. I've got three questions, but I'll keep them brief. The first one, and apologies for being so grim on a Monday morning, is we mentioned COVID-19 investment risk. Has that had a material impact, bluntly, on payouts, i.e., is the excess debt rate either translating into lower payouts, or is it modelled to go and translate into lower payouts over the next couple of years as the crisis sadly plays out? The second one, I've already asked earlier in the meeting, but it applies to you guys as well, is be interested to know more thoughts on negative interest rates and how you go and model those in discounting or not if the rates are negative, future cash flows, and how that's modelled in pension deficits and how we contribute towards those. And the third thing, probably more towards the point that Jill made. I'm interested in the point that Jill says about engagement being more effective than divestments. Now, I could possibly suggest that the kind of companies, say fossil fuel companies, for example, or want a big environmental footprint, so that would be the oil companies, the miners, are also traditionally the kind of companies which do form part of pension funds. The Rio Tintos of this world and the BPs and the Shells, are big dividending and stable dividend payers on the whole. So you can model those, they're good stocks for pension funds to go and hold. So I'm interested to know as to why you would think engagement would be better rather than divestment, when that would be, if lots of pension funds are to do that, that would be a big divestment of capital and make it more expensive for those firms then to go and raise capital on the international markets because they have less of a pool of investors. I'd just be interested on your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Alex. So I'll pick up on the COVID-19 mortality impact, talk a little bit about negative interest rates, and then I'll hand over to Jill to talk a little bit about the investment divest engage piece, and in particular we can talk to you a little bit about the engagement we're doing with those same financial institutions, which I think is absolutely critical, as you say. So the first one on COVID and mortality, just to give you some assurance, there's 2 streams of monitoring analysis that's been undertaken. So there's some early indicators that I'm involved in monitoring through my role with the Scheme Advisory Board. That is to look at the count of deaths across the regions, and in a similar way to as we sort of all see on a regular basis, we're looking at how that varies by region and the spikes. We have seen some spikes in that. The second part of the analysis, which is fundamental to what do the long-term impacts mean for life expectancy and ultimately for pension costs, has been undertaken on a pilot basis by 2 of the actuarial firms, including one of our own, and that's collectively, the conclusions of those 2 exercises at the minute are that yes, we've seen a spike. It has impacted the timing, unfortunately, of some members and their benefits being curtailed. However, there is, as you suggested, an expectation that this is merely brought forward a short period of time at which they would have happened in any event. And at the minute, the analysis is similar to when the year a few years ago where we had the flu vaccine, which was slightly less effective. So in terms of long-term impacts on both life expectancy and pension liabilities, we're not expecting a significant impact at the minute, but it's something we're continuing to monitor. In terms of negative interest rates, I mean, I just kind of mentioned very, very briefly on this, it is incredibly challenging for all pension funds and all investors at this point in time. It does impact, as you say, on liability valuations, and it impacts on sources of return. As a large open pension fund, we do predominantly invest in growth assets, and where we're looking to more closely match liabilities, we're not investing when interest rates are negative. We do have the advantage of being a long-term pension fund, so we can take a longer-term view, but at the same time we have to balance that against the risk of needing to match the need to make those liability payments as well. So we have some, but not all, but we do monitor interest rates, and I think interest rates have gone, nobody thought we'd get this low. Nobody, the jury, I think, is still out on this point in terms of where we go next, but recent commentators have indicated that more likely now than ever we're expecting to go slightly higher than we are at the minute, but again the time frame for that is incredibly uncertain. So Jill, I don't know if you want to comment any more on that, or maybe we just focus based on timing on the engage divest.
Yeah, certainly can talk about the engage divest. I think yes, we could divest, and I'm aware that a number of pension funds have made that commitment. However, you then lose the ability to discuss and engage with the companies direct, because you no longer have a level of interest with them. I think it's interesting if you look across the globe at the fossil fuel companies, those that have received, shall we say, quite a lot of engagement, such as the European oil companies like BP and Shell, they are much further advanced in their sort of plans to try and achieve net zero by 2050, looking at how they can manage their climate risks, and they've put things into their strategy and into the public domain as to how they're going to achieve those. Speaking or listening into one of the managers from BP, they were very clear that the engagement that they've had from investors has really helped them on that journey. I think if you then look at the US oil companies, the level of engagement that they've probably had is significantly less than the Europeans, and they are considerably further behind. I think the other thing is that not all of these companies will be part of that transition plan, but there are risks to not being invested in some of the companies that do form part of the solution. There's a Danish oil company that's almost fully transformed itself over the last 10-15 years to actually become a totally green energy company, if you like, or is almost there, and the performance of those shares has been exceedingly strong compared to perhaps the oil companies. So there's a risk that we might miss out. I think what we need to do is continue to engage, to monitor the progress, hold these companies accountable. They also have huge cash flows coming in, and assuming that they will put some of this to work into developing solutions, that's the big part of the cash flow that's going to help to build the renewable energy space. Happy to.
Thank you, Jill.
Talk further about.
Okay, let me. Alex, are you happy with those answers? Because I've got a couple of other hands up. Thank you, David. I think you've been very patient. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. It's a couple of questions, really. One might not quite be for this forum, but I don't know anything about Mac Cloud. which you use. As I say, that perhaps might fall more into the IT side. But I was also interested in the fact that I sit on the Worcestershire County Council Pension Board, and they have had insurance to mitigate any effects of the stock market fall, which obviously came into play recently. So my second question is to ask you whether we have you have similar. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so happy to talk about that. So the use of, I think, what we've called equity protection strategies by pension funds is something that's been sort of hotly debated in terms of, and just for the broader audience, this is where you use derivative instruments to limit the amount that your assets can be affected by volatility in the stock market. So effectively, if markets fall, you're protected, and you give a bit away of the upside to manage some of the downside. It is a strategy that we have looked at. We've looked at it in the context of where we're going in terms of broad risk within the fund, and also what the cost of that strategy would be and how it would be managed over the long term. In summary, from where we are at the minute, which is we still have a predominantly growth-based strategy. In part of our review, we looked at bringing that allocation down more permanently, and based on that analysis, we concluded that was a better long-term way to manage the risk that didn't have quite the same operational dependencies, but it is effectively doing the similar thing. So we've taken our target allocation to global equities down by 10% when we did our review, which was signed off back in March this year, and that's a more long-term effective way of managing the risk in the context of what we're trying to achieve with the liabilities we've got, with the employer profile that we've got. But there's different tools for effectively risk management.
David, are you happy with that? David, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am. I can only say that, and there was somebody else came on the chat line about Shropshire also having done the same thing. How effective it has been. I think we got an extra 24 million pounds out of it because we had that insurance. So I would just sort of countenance that it's something that perhaps should be moved up on the radar a little bit more. And my other point was about the Mac Cloud, but as I say, that might not be for this forum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Rachel, do you want to have another comment on the insurance cover that Alex and David have referred to, or have you said all you really can say on it?
No, I think it's not really a right or wrong answer. I mean, we've seen some unprecedented movements in equity markets in the last 6 months, and I think we are looking at it more as how we assess the value it will add over a longer term. So it is something we'll continue to look at and review, but we monitor risk within the investment portfolio against a suite of metrics, and I guess volatility in the investments is one. We're also looking at liquidity. We're also looking at probability of needing to go back and ask for additional contributions from our employers. So we look at kind of on a broad range of considerations, and we look at a range of tools. And as I say, in different scenarios, some will perform differently. Over the long term, we're comfortable that the measure we've taken at the minute, which is to reduce the headline allocation, is the right one, but we'll continue to keep that under review.
Thank you, Rachel.
Tools across the local government pension scheme, and on these particular issues, they've been very sort of helpful and supportive in taking some of these difficult issues forward. Back in 2014, we did engage with a number of defence companies on their manufacture and distribution. We saw some change from companies as a result of that. We've had some more recent engagement which has been helpful in terms of understanding how they're managing their own sort of corporate responsibilities, which are developing. So it's an area where we are seeing change, but it's also an area where it would be wrong of me to say that we weren't continuing to engage and we weren't continuing to want to see more action in certain areas. I think I'll leave it there then. Jill, do you want to add to that?
I was only going to mention the Hanwha position because I'm aware that we received quite a lot of pressure on Hanwha, perhaps earlier in the year as well. It was a company that we looked to engage with over a number of years. We didn't see any progress, and ultimately we did make that decision to divest on that occasion. However, we only invested in the company that was directly related to arms manufacture and cluster munitions, but we retained holdings in other Hanwha companies. Part of that is to do with, they don't necessarily just focus on arms. One of the other companies within the group actually is one of the biggest solar panel makers. So there are sometimes conflicting things as to what companies do with divest from the Hanwha making cluster.
Thank you very much, Jill. If and when we face negative interest rates, because I suspect there'll be some interest as to what's going on that, but we'll leave that for another time. Thank you both very much for coming.
Thank you.
Moving it on, we now have Harjil to talk about the West Midlands Combined Authority Assurance Update. And again, I suspect this is going to be a work in progress, and so therefore the verbal update will simply be just a quick update on where we are with that. Harjil?
Thank you, Chair. So in the last report to ARAC, I outlined assurance capabilities through a refreshed toolkit. And key assurance findings with the resulting trend analysis information. And in the last report, I also gave an indication of work that we are undertaking to explore solutions to track progress against recommendations from assurance activity. Since the last report, work is continuing to implement the refreshed assurance capabilities and activities in line with our single assurance framework implementation. And again, since the last reporting period, some assurance activities have been undertaken. However, we have been limited in the data available to demonstrate the impact on trend analysis information for this reporting period here. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So a couple of important things to note. At the moment, we are constrained in that assurance activity is driven by project lifecycle stages. And as we know, programs move at different phases in their respective life cycles. So what that means is that it doesn't always allow for consistent assurance activity and therefore the flow of trend analysis information to be reported into forums like ARAC. The other important thing to note is that we recognise that to mitigate against that, and in line with developing tranche 3 of our single assurance framework, it's intended that in-flight assurance activity will be more commonplace, meaning that we will have a better picture either in traditional delivery phases or in between of development stages. And when I say development, what I mean by that is business case development stages. So ultimately, it will enable us a richer picture of what's taking place with the project's programs and also moving trend analysis information. So finally, work is continuing to find a technical solution or approach that can help us with tracking of recommendations and progress against them in as automated a way as possible. So an update on that will follow at the January ARAC meeting in terms of where we are with that. And the hope is that it will give us a picture for the extent to which assurance recommendations are acted upon, essentially as a reflection of optimizing performance in either development or delivery. So that's a very quick snapshot as to where we are. There has been assurance activity that's been undertaken since the last reporting period, but unfortunately, we have had limited data as a result of that activity to be able to plug into and understand what it means from a moving trend analysis perspective. So,
thank you, Hardil. Can I just check, are there any hands up? Anybody who wish to raise any questions? I'm not seeing any. Hardil, you said at the end of your update that the January update will give us an insight as to how well the assurance recommendations are being taken into account. I think that's probably the critical area that ARAC wants to focus in on, because if there isn't the attention being given, or if the recommendations are not being taken up, then I think ARAC would want to understand that better. The exam question I suppose I've got for you is the frequency of you coming and giving an update to ARAC at each meeting going to be too frequent for you? Or should we leave it at that for the moment and just see how it beds down?
It's, in honesty, it's a really difficult question to answer. Only thinking about thinking about the frequency of the assurance activity and how that assurance activity is driven by life cycle stages. So I can't say, I don't think with certainty whether it would be too frequent, but if it's okay with you, it's something that we could just monitor on an ongoing basis. And if we find that we are getting, quite a lot of information as a result of the assurance activity, then certainly we can report into ARAC.
Okay, well then you're coming back in January just to update us on how the assurance recommendations have been taken into account. Why don't you at that point in time give a recommendation as to the frequency with which you should come? I don't really want to be, and I don't think members will be wanting to see you on a regular basis to largely be told nothing. So I think put it in your hands, but the purpose really of bringing it to ARAC is to give a little bit of extra oomph to the assurance recommendations being taken seriously.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Are members okay with that, taking that line then? Good. Thank you very much, Ardil. Moving on then to number 9 on the agenda. Tim, I think you've got the first bit, which is the organisational strategic response on COVID.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just reminding the meeting that at the last meeting we had a more detailed report that Deborah and myself presented in the main about how the organisation had responded to the challenges of COVID. So the Chair asked me if I could sort of effectively review and update that report from what's happened since then. So just a quick verbal report from me, and also Julia Goldsworthy is on the call as well, so she may be able to update with regard to some of the activity around funding, and Linda will also comment on that. So in terms of the Combined Authority, we continue to manage our governance processes through remote means, and obviously today's meeting is being managed through the remote meetings regulations. All statutory boards and committees, our thematic boards, continue to meet virtually and to take decisions, and we're not really experiencing any difficulties with that at the moment, so that's encouraging. We continue to manage the work of the authority through predominantly home working of staff, and there are robust arrangements in place for anybody who does need to attend Summer Lane for operational reasons. We're ensuring that staff remain in touch with the organisation through regular monitoring, through contact with their line managers, and a fairly detailed programme of things like an all-staff webinar that takes place every week that touches on subjects that are important for staff to know about. We've also got a number of training events that are held online, and we've also sort of increased the work that we do around well-being and staff welfare. So we're really continuing to make efforts to look after the staff welfare. We appreciate this is a difficult time for lots of people. There's difficult arrangements working from home for some people, and we're conscious of mental health issues, and we're managing that as line managers and as an organisation. As infections rise again, sadly, we continue to play our part in the regional resilience arrangements. We still take part with the strategic coordinating group, and we are managing the recovery coordinating group on behalf of the LRF regions for West Midlands and also for Warwickshire. It's a joint LRF. The Mayor continues to play a leadership role in terms of the regional interface with government over things like, moving between tiers, the level of restrictions. And in those discussions, I think it's really important to reassure everybody that the Met leaders are also front and centre in those discussions, and the Mayor is taking a lot of steps to make sure that the work that we do is coordinated with particularly the Met leaders and also the non-con leaders, so that we don't have a sort of uncoordinated approach to government. But obviously the government are quite keen to deal with the Mayor because obviously it's a single point of contact. So we will aim to avoid some of the issues that have arisen in other areas when discussions have been taking place. So in terms of that as a summary, I believe as the monitoring officer that we are maintaining robust governance arrangements during this pandemic. We're still maintaining proper governance controls and processes. That's not to minimise the challenges to the organisation, which obviously are very obvious and not to be underestimated, but they're the same obviously as are for all of your organisations. So we'll continue to keep all of that under review. Future funding and other colleagues are probably better placed to comment on this, but you'll be aware that the funding review, the public sector funding review, is now indicated as simply being a one-year review, which is not as optimal as we'd hoped. Obviously, we are still pressing forward with our aims and our objectives and our asks about more long-term sustainable funding for both the combined authority and local authorities. And we're looking for clarification about how ongoing funding streams, such as for public transport, for the investment fund, and for adult education, will be clarified in the future as we go forward. And also the white paper on devolution, which we've commented on a couple of times in these discussions. Unfortunately, that also appears to be slipping back. There have been political discussions around this, but obviously the government are focusing on response to the pandemic at the moment. And it does appear that white paper, which we'd hoped first to receive in the early autumn, then possibly the mid-autumn, late autumn, it looks like probably it's going to be in the new year now. And it's unclear what the government's appetite is for thoroughgoing devolution reforms as we go forward, but it's possible that it may focus on a refreshed industrial strategy, because obviously that is clearly a big priority. So, Chair, that's my verbal update. I know we've got Julia and Linda on the call as well on the meeting, so they may be able to give you more detail about some of those matters that I've touched on towards the end of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Before I engage Linda, Julia, do you want to just give any update you've got on the on where we are with our relationship with government and some of the future bids that you've got going in? That's assuming Julia's here.
Well, I did see her earlier on the list, but maybe she's had to dial off for some reason. I don't know. All
right. Well, Linda, in which case I've seen somebody's hand up, but can I just get you to comment on the financial update, and then I'll take questions.
Yeah. So clearly, as you would expect, we are very closely monitoring our financial position. We originally took a report back in June for an initial assessment where we thought we'd be in a deficit of around about £11 million this year. Through work within the organisation and for the continuing discussions with government, as a result of additional grants, financial support from government around the bus industry, light rail funding, as well as the entitlement of mayoral combined authorities to be able to claim, in the same way that local authorities can, loss of income around sales fees and charges. We have reported now that we are forecasting a deficit of around £2 million this year, and that went to the last combined authority board. Members may recall that at the end of last financial year, we managed to set aside £1.3 million as a COVID provision, if you like, because we knew we were heading into some potential financial pressures. So actually, from an in-year financial position, we continue to work internally around the business transformation, and we have set up a productivity and efficiencies board internally, which is looking to drive a programme of productivity and efficiencies, which hopefully will deliver financial savings in this year, but also into the future. So from my perspective, the current year is manageable, and we will take the next financial monitoring report to the November board. The medium term, however, we are showing a substantial financial pressures in the medium term. They've been reported to both the June and the last board as well, and we've been having conversations between the Mayor and Met leaders in terms of the mitigations around that, the financial pressures, not least in terms of the immediate pressures of us needing to bring a balanced budget to the committee in January for the next financial year. So we will provide an update to members at the next committee on where we've got to on those budget discussions. We've got a further update with the Mayor and Met leaders at their session in November. I think it's the 13th or 14th of November. In the meantime, we have been complying with the government requirements. They issued what they called a PPN, supplier relief notice, which meant that during the pandemic we were required to pay all of our suppliers on an immediate payment basis, which we have been doing, and also we have been paying at pre-COVID demand levels for our transport operators. That cabinet notice expires on the 31st of October, and we are in active discussions with government in terms of what they are planning to do next. So I have a call later today with both the FT and CLG around that. As Tim's already said, the rollover, essentially we were hoping for a 3-year comprehensive spending review settlement, which we were hoping would have provided a more sustainable financial solution for mayoral combined authorities going forward. The fact that it is now a 1 year, we will continue to work with CLG on what that financial settlement will be and will deliver, and how we can mitigate next year's estimated deficit. I think that's all I wanted to say, David. I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, I am on mute. Ram, you had your hand up. Have you still got a question?
Chair, I didn't put my hand up. I'm not sure why it is. It doesn't show on my screen.
Okay, and then I'll move on to Alan if I can.
Thank you, David. Tim mentioned that there's been an increase with the work around the staff welfare and mental health issues. I just wonder, with this increased work around there, were there any major concerns that came to light that you hadn't sort of thought of before this extra work? I'm just looking around the impact on the mental welfare, particularly with staff at this time.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, we did have a number of policies and procedures in place previously to look after the welfare of our staff, and we have, as most authorities would do, we have things like the confidential helpline and access to support for that sort of thing. But we do recognise that this is a particularly difficult time for lots of people, even people who ordinarily don't find work particularly stressful, are in different situations now. So people are having to work from home. That isn't always an easy situation for people, and they may be juggling childcare or care for other family members. So we're very conscious of that. In terms of what we found, we're just responding really to the sort of anecdotal evidence from individual members of staff, from line managers, and from what people are telling us. We do monitor sickness statistics, obviously, as you'd expect. Generally, stress and mental health issues are one of the higher indicators of the reason why people have time off work. I suspect that's the same in your organisations as well. So obviously we will always be looking to put in place measures to mitigate against that. So I don't think there's nothing that we wouldn't expect to have happened, but obviously we are very conscious that people are under pressure, and of course people are worried about the situation generally and in the country and in their localities. So, you know, this is just a tricky time for everybody, and we want to try and make sure that we can support our staff as best we can, albeit we understand, you know, as an employer, there's only so much that we can do to help people with aspects of their lives that are nothing to do with work.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Alan. Ahmed, you have a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Impressive work being done by Linda, Tim and their teams to mitigate risks at this very difficult time, especially in terms of what Linda was mentioning around the deficit of 11 million that's now gone down to 2 million. That's a 9 million reduction, which is not an unsizable amount by any stretch of the imagination. I just had a question in terms of management of risk with regards to the uncertainty over transport levels and supply levels. Obviously, Linda mentioned that they've been paid at pre-COVID levels. We don't know what the government is going to say yet post 31st of October, but I just wondered what we're doing in terms of managing risk by way of outstanding contractual obligations and where we are, where those stand, generally speaking. Thank you, Chair.
I don't mind which of us comes in on that. I suppose it's a combination of myself, Tim and Julia, really. Certainly from a financial perspective, we are monitoring all of our suppliers base very closely in terms of their stability. One of the good things to have happened and we've been able to do, obviously, is to keep the stability within the transport operations because of the requirement for us to pay at pre-COVID demand levels, and we are actively engaged with all of our suppliers around their current financial position, the financial pressures, but also how they are how we are creating capacity and managing the capacity across the network with the obvious requirements of social distancing. So at the minute, our rail patronage is quite low compared to the capacity, but we've seen quite substantial recovery in our light rail patronage. And also the bus patronage, I think is the last I saw, that was a back up to about 60%. So we have active engagement in place on almost a daily basis between our transport operations teams and the transport operators to ensure that we have we have got foresight into any emerging pressures. But at the minute, as I say, the government has committed to fund the transport industry right the way through to the 31st of March. So that has been able to give us a bit of breathing space at the minute. So at least from a financial perspective, the transport industry is protected from the risk, if you like, of any further sort of wave or tier implications.
Thank you, Linda. Tim, is there anything else you want to add before I just check if that was answered Ahmed's question?
The only thing I would add, Chair, is just to sort of reassure members that Linda and myself, as two of the statutory officers of the organisation, work really closely together in monitoring all of these developments, and we meet regularly with Deborah as the other statutory officer, head of paid service. We meet formally and informally just to make sure that we're on top of this sort of situation, which is fast moving. So that's all really to add, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. Ahmed, are you content with the answers you've been given?
Absolutely, Chair. It's reassuring to hear about the transport reassurance till the 31st of March. That is reassuring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody got any other questions? I've seen no other hands. Okay.
Chair, just
while
you ask now, I should take the chance. Linda mentioned earlier about 3 years pending review issue. I know we are all looking for when that falls in. Is there any information, Linda, that government is close enough to do this spending review at all? Just for information. Yeah.
Sorry, you broke up there on the actual question. I didn't quite catch it.
Sorry, 3 years spending review.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything latest? What's going on and how close we are for it?
Yeah, so Julia might be on the, again, if Julia's on, she may well have further an update, a more recent update than what that I've got. But the last I heard back in the last week was it will be a 1 year rollover essentially, and they will be due to announce towards the end of November to nationally to local authorities and to mayoral combined authorities.
I think, Ram, I can't see Julia as being on the line. What I have picked up in the press, I suspect we will have picked up in the press, is that there's quite a few departments that are now gasping for trying to get an understanding of what this 1 year review versus 3 year review is going to do. I don't suspect that there's any more clarity out there at the moment. What I can do is to have on the agenda for the January meeting another verbal update from Julia as to where we are and what this actually means to us. But at the moment, I think it's probably only just been announced and not everybody's really sure what this means.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ahmed, you've got your hand up still. Is that another question or just need to take your hand down?
Sorry, Chair, I think that's up from before. I'll thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm seeing no other questions. I'm going to move on to Fiona, who's going to give us an update on the strategic risk review, which, as I said earlier, we are continuing to be in a significant hiatus, as we've just heard. So I suspect Fiona will be largely saying there's not a great deal to update from the last meeting. Everything still is in a bit of a confusion how we can actually get too much mitigation while this crisis is on. But Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Exactly right. The risk landscape continues to evolve, and this is reflected in the risk register in the additional entries which have now been added, highlighted as the COVID-19 risk and response. But I did think it would be worthwhile going through a few highlights from the risk register that has been shared with ARAC. A few changes primarily. So risk 17, which is rail services industrial action, this has now been closed. Dispute resolution was agreed in December 2019, and whilst this risk continues to be monitored, it seemed appropriate that actually this be closed and moved off the risk register into that closed tab. Also risk 16, this relates to HS2 economic and programme updates. This has also been closed following the conclusion of the OCAV review. We do have a change as well, so risk SO2. We've talked, certainly Linda and Tim have just talked to the previous item about the well-being of staff, and SO2 relates to capacity and capability staffing, and it does sit with HR. So this risk score has seen an increase from 9 to 16, and this is primarily because of COVID-19 and the impact it is having on well-being and also staff morale. So the Human Resources team will be undertaking a staff survey in December, and that will provide a realistic touch point to get a feel of how people are coping with the changes and working at home in this period when they've had several months to adjust, but going obviously into a winter period and with infection rates rising. So we will review that risk again following the staff survey. There's one new risk, which is S20. That's the investment programme reputational impact. And this is for projects that are delivered by partners and relates to the failure to deliver due to circumstances outside of their control. So it does have a risk score of 8 at the moment. So they are the changes and amendments to the current risk register. I think it's worth saying that Victoria Harmon, who's our strategic risk manager, is working quite closely with SLT and directorates at the moment on a strategic risk framework, and that will include reviewing how the risk register is presented in line with good practice. So ARAC committee, you may see some changes over the next few months as we make amendments and improvements to the way it is presented. Thank you, Chair.
Very clear, Fiona. Thank you very much. David, I think I saw your hand go up.
You did, Chair. Thank you very much. There's been and will continue to be a seismic shift in terms of the way people work. We all know that. So more and more of our buildings, our sort of concrete buildings, will be more and more disused or less used, and more will like what they have to do from home. What are the risks associated with that? Potentially, for example, long leases on buildings that will become surplus. Is any work being done about that?
So the strategic risk register is reviewed with the directorates, and the building, certainly Summer Lane building, that all sits with Gareth Bradford, who's the Director of Housing and Land and Regeneration, and it sits within his team. So we're working quite closely around some of the changes that are being made to the WMCA housing building stock and facilities. There's work underway at the moment within the transformation project as well to have a look at how those buildings could be used in the future in terms of maybe collaborative space where people need larger team meetings, but also making a COVID secure building where people can have those difficult conversations or one-to-ones. So they are actually reviewing how the buildings are being used at this time, and we'll continue to have those conversations with Gareth and his team as that evolves.
Yeah, I would also contend associated with that was the fact that more and more people are working from home, and there are more and more established and increasing mental health issues with that. Is that considered a risk? And how, if it is, how might we be dealing with it?
That is considered a risk, and that's primarily why one of the risks has increased from 9 to 16 because of this issue around staff wellbeing and morale. And I think across the WMCA there has been that acknowledgement that people have been working from home for a period of about 7 months now. The organisation does ensure that there's things like the DSC assessments, regular check-ins with line managers, and there's a lot of additional training happening as well to support staff, but it is a continued risk. It is being reviewed, and I do think that staff survey in December will be a great opportunity for people to have their input and say specifically what are the issues that are affecting them and how WMCA can respond to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona.
David, thank you for that question. Fiona and Tim, I suspect, will probably need to pick up on this. I think it would be very useful for ARAC to have a summary of the findings from that staff survey, in particular around mental health risk, at the earliest possible meeting. It may be that there's a short update from you, Tim, in the January meeting and a slightly longer report at a subsequent meeting when there's more detail available.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I suspect it will be timely for me to give another of these reports on how we're getting on in terms of the governance and everything, and I can cover that then. Just to point out, obviously, if you need more detail in terms of a staff survey, that would normally be Tracy Walters, and we can always ask Tracy or one of her staff to come along and assist with that at the right time. And I'm not entirely sure when the report will be finally available and be analysed, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it would be helpful to have a summary update from yourself at the January meeting, and then if Tanya can add it to the subsequent meeting, a more detailed update from Tracy, then it's an important part of our monitoring.
Yeah.
David, would you be happy with that?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Ahmed, you're next, I think, on my question list.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just a question in terms of staff working from home, management of data, and on David's point, really, the real possibility that for many staff working from home has been preferable and could be a long-term solution that's explored in terms of productivity, etc. How are we in terms of management of data, online data in particular? Are we able to get significant reassurance in that regard at this stage?
Ahmed, let me take that one because that came up at the last meeting in terms of data protection, and there's an update coming at the January meeting, specifically around home working. when we asked them to give us a much greater, the team to give us a much greater understanding around home working risks. So if you've no objection, I'd like to just defer that to come back at the January meeting with a detailed report.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Alex?
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from David's points about uses of buildings, and actually take it a bit more widely, we're seeing quite a lot of our investment projects going forward have certain assumptions on rates of return on commercial buildings, especially, which may not be achieved now. The economy's fundamentally changed. I mean, whenever I get off at Wolverhampton railway station, I see these wonderful posters about these new commercial districts and everything, and how these businesses are going to go and shoot up. And I suddenly think it feels like a different world.
Yeah,
so
it is.
on our investment projects going forward, you know, particularly like those transport regens, also investments towards the Commonwealth Games in particular. How have those investment assumptions fundamentally changed over COVID, and what impact will that have on our finances?
I noticed Julia's joined the meeting. Julia, do you want to put a comment on that before I throw that to Linda?
Apologies. Why don't you go to Linda first, I think, if that's okay.
Okay. Linda, do you want to reply to that, Alex's point?
Yeah, I think at the minute we've had no fundamental shift. So we are closely monitoring all of our programmes. There is a risk-based approach to that, and we are monitoring risks through the investment board, specifically on our commercial funds, and also around our investments that are requiring us to, say, borrow on the back of revenue that was due to come in. So at the minute, nothing has required me to advise anyone that we need to stop what we are currently doing, but obviously we need to be mindful of if there is a continuing shift. I just think it's a little bit too early at the minute to say if there is a continuing shift to a completely different way of working, then clearly our strategies will need to be amended to reflect that. But as of this point in time, our financial risks are being managed through the appropriate governance structures and being monitored in that way, and there's no indication that anything has moved that seismically that it would halt anything we're currently doing.
And then there's a wider piece of economic analysis that we're doing, but as Linda said, we're really into the foothills of that, just to understanding the broader kind of scenario impact of the pandemic, in particular on our very urban centres. So we are working with constituent authorities, that cover the cities that we have in the region, to try and work through how we build a consistent evidence base so that we have a shared view on what we think the potential impacts might be. But that is in its very early stages at the moment, and I think the challenge is the longer you try and look into to predict the future around what we think the long-term impacts will be, the greater the uncertainty around kind of, whether we think some of those scenarios might play out. But that is a piece of work that's underway.
Thank you, Julia. Alex, you okay with that? Okay, just checking around the room. Are there any other hands raised or questions anybody wants to raise? Good. In which case, thank you very much, Fiona. That was a very good update, and I look forward to a continuing reduction of our hiatus over the next 12 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I hand on to Peter to update us on the internal audit reports and cover off any topics that he wants to?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is just bringing the members of the committee up to date with the internal audit programme since we last met. Since that time, we've completed 3 reports on the single commissioning framework, where we gave substantial assurance. The third generation trams programme, we gave satisfactory assurance there. So what we have done in the report is we've appended the full internal audit report, so members have the opportunity to look at our comments, findings and recommendations. And we've also completed and issued final report on the sprint programme management. Again, substantial assurance. All of our green or amber recommendations were agreed. So sort of that reinforces the message that Tim was giving earlier, that in our view, since the outbreak of the pandemic, there hasn't really been any drop in the governance or the control framework across and within the CA, which is good news. Moving on to the rest of the audit programme, for the January meeting, we're planning to bring at least 4 further outcomes of internal audit reports. 2 of those will be on the COVID-19 responses to procurement and employee management, and it may be that the review on employee management will sort of build on some of the messages that the members have just been talking about with regards to the CA's response with regards to its employees and the pandemic. There's the more traditional key financial systems audit round of programmes due to be completed, and also a piece of work on the environmental management system. The field work or planning is underway on all 4 of those. There are 2 more pieces of work that were planned to come to January. I just need to give members a quick heads up with regards to the situation on those. The first one on the Commonwealth Games Strategic Transport Plan. We are aware that the Commonwealth Games organising committee's own internal auditors are also doing a similar piece of work around the transport arrangements within the CA. So what we've done is we've made contact with them, and we're planning a joint approach to this review to make sure that there's no duplication and we don't unnecessarily draw upon the CA's time. So we'll work together on that. At this point, we've had 2 or 3 introductory meetings and started to scalp out the work, but we're not sure in which direction that will actually go yet and how quick that will progress. So we'll keep the chair of ARAC, David, updated on how that progresses. But at the point of reporting, the OC will then break away and report back to the OC board, and we'll do our own report that's specifically focused upon CA issues. And the other one is on Friar Park, the Friar Park project. Now, we recently made contact with the director in that area, and they mentioned that now that project is completed, they prefer for the audit resource to be focused upon another live project. So we're currently in discussions with them with regards to which project when we'll be able to complete that piece of work. So as a minimum, hopefully 4 pieces of work will be completed for the January meeting. Then there's a further 4 scheduled for the April meeting. Looking at the rest of our report, we also follow up previous recommendations that we have made, because obviously that's a key element of ensuring that the CA is responding to the work of internal and external auditors. And what has happened then is there's quite a few of reports that have been issued over the last 12 months or so. So what we've done is we've had discussions with Tim and Lorraine within the CA, and the plan is that Lorraine initially will now check on progress made against those recommendations. If you follow the 3 lines of defence model, that's sort of like offering a second line of defence where Lorraine and the team will provide updates, gain updates, and check how well or not recommendations are being implemented. Then ourselves as your internal auditors will then jump in on the 3rd line of defence model and do a few deep dives on some of those recommendations and provide some independent assurance around that. So we're hopeful that between us we'll have a stronger programme of following up those recommendations in a more timely manner than we have done in the past. And that,
thank you,
really
thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions that are going to come up from Alex and I think David, but let me just make a couple of points. I think it's a good addition that you are bringing Lorraine into play on the follow-ups, but can we make sure that in the CA providing follow-ups, that internal audit satisfy themselves that the quality of those follow-ups is to the standard that you want? Mm-hmm. So we want to be able to hold you accountable for those follow-ups being good enough. And 2, can we make sure that we still get a formal report on those follow-ups, which we would have done had you been doing it?
Yes, that's the plan. I think rather than individual reports on each particular area, they'll probably be presented more in a sort of a log or an action tracker so that you can see what action's been taken against individual ones, rather than a single report for each particular follow-up, unless we feel there's a need for a report in a particular area.
Okay, but let's be clear, I think ARAC would want to be able to look at a single point of contact, i.e. internal audit, for the QAing of that type of work.
Yeah, that would be us, yes, definitely.
Okay, questions. Let me throw it first to Alex. Alex, you're on mute. Alex, you're on mute.
Sorry, I don't have a question. That was my hand still up from the previous one. So you're off the hook.
Okay, David.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm a bit out of sync here, but I wanted to, if it's okay with you, Chair, just to make a very brief comment about risk. I'm the risk champion for Redditch, and it's quite an interesting thing. But it's pretty much the only advantage of COVID, really, is that it is enabling us to look deeply at our risks and our risk profile. And previously, a lot of the departments that I've asked for comments on this, the only risk they had on their books was the either increasing or decreasing age profile of their department. That was it. Nowadays, COVID has forced us to look at every risk, every action that we take. I think that's the one, well, it's not really an advantage, but it's the only sort of positive that can come out of this whole horrible pandemic. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was a bit out of sync there.
That's fine. Thank you, David. We actually have we've got Michael Anderson, who represents as the lead manager for the third generation trans project here. Does anybody wish to ask any questions about the audit report on the third generation trams? Because there were one or two things in that might instigate a question. So does anybody want to raise anything? All right. Can I raise one then? Under the two amber recommendations, Peter, the first one is where the project may not have been fully subject to the appropriate CA project assurance point. It clearly went through the project assurance that was valid at the time. I suppose I would be asking of you and maybe of Michael whether or not there is any benefit in it going through the enhanced assurance system that's now in place, or whether you are content that actually it was good enough at the time.
I'm not sure if Michael has a view on that. We would think it would be beneficial to go through some sort of assurance program just to make sure that it continues as expected. But Michael, I don't know if you've got a different view.
Well, I think it has been through most of the assurance steps that would have been applicable. We didn't do any of the -3 to -1 steps because the business cases came in the extensions rather than in the actual tram delivery. They were all allocated to specific trams. And although there wasn't a process to follow up, we did complete the gateways 3 and 4. And they were signed off by Nafisa Arif as our financial manager and by Tim Martin and Rachel Morgan. So we proceeded along that way, and we have recently updated the Metro assurance structure. Previously, it had all been labelled as MMA because all of the extensions were delivered through the MMA. But because the rolling stock was procured directly by ourselves, we adapted the Metro systems based on the MMA structure, which itself was already based on the Combined Authority Gateway programme. So I think we've got the processes we need in place. We're more than happy, obviously, to have some questions later on and have another audit of the 3GT tram, maybe when it's delivered next year. But we think that we have a fairly robust process in place within TFWM as it is.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. So if you like, the first recommendation that Amber recommendation that Audit gave was that it hadn't been subjected to the most up-to-date version of the assurance programme, but it had been subjected to what was in place at the time. The obvious question there would have to be, well, does it need to go through the more rigorous process that now exists? I think I've just heard you say you don't believe that's the case. Is that right?
To me, it feels that it was sufficiently robust as it's gone through, yes.
And Peter, because you put that recommendation in, would you concur with Michael's view, or would you prefer to push for it to go through the newer process that wasn't relevant at the time?
Sorry, Dave, you're breaking up a little bit there. But
okay. You put the recommendation in that said it hadn't gone through the assurance process that is now present, but it had gone through the one that was present at the time. Are you keen to press that it actually goes through the more up-to-date process, or do you accept Michael's reply, which is noted, but we don't believe that that it needs to go through the more up-to-date process now.
If you don't mind, Chair, I'd like to have that discussion with Michael at an operational level, just to establish that we get a clear understanding between both ourselves and Michael with regards to how we should take that forward. Because my view was there was still a bit more work that could be done in that area, but we can pick that up. And also about evidencing the work that's undertaken. So there may be a way of meeting in the middle on that, but we can definitely pick that up.
Yeah,
Our members. Okay, are members happy then that Peter replies to me directly on whether or not we need to do any further work on that, or whether we accept Michael's contention that it probably is unnecessary, and I can deal with that before the next meeting?
Agreed, Chair. Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, Peter, Michael, can you have that discussion, and can one of you come back and let me know what is proposed? Because that's of the two recommendations, that's the one that stands out. And it's, if we're taking no action on it, then I would argue, why is it in the report? So I'd like to be clear what action is going to be taken.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my view is we still need some action on that, but yes, we will work
together on that. Okay. Anything else on the internal audit report? Good. Thank you very much. Moving on then, if I may, to Grant Thornton on the external audit update for the year ending. I'm sure you're not going to need 20 minutes, Grant.
I should try and be succinct. I know you don't always be who I am, but I will try and I'll try and do it. I'm going to hand over to Helen in a moment, but I'll just have a couple of minutes. Just in context, we were due to bring the annual audit letter to you at this audit committee. Clearly, as you've been hearing, and I think as Tim has alluded to already, that COVID has impacted just more broadly in terms of delivery timelines. So per the forward plan, we will be bringing the annual audit letter to the next audit ARAC, which will be in January. And I suppose that enters the context of where we are on the audit. I think probably just for members in context about where local government opinions are generally, very few have been signed nationally. So I think in that sense, and I'm not saying that that's a great place to be, but that is just all the firms, not just Grant Thornton, are working through the pandemic, and audits are taking longer. We are very close to completing the combined authority audit, and Helen will take you through a little bit more detail. I just thought what I pick up now is some of the pension fund elements, and it's primarily because if members aren't aware, I'm also the engagement lead for the West Midlands Pension Fund. So you heard from Rachel earlier today. So I'll just give a little bit of context to some of those matters that she did raise. In our report, the primary we're saying we're waiting for assurances from myself, effectively as pension fund auditor, in relation to the information that went to the actuary. Just to give members assurance, is as a pension fund auditor, I've now completed that work. We did identify one matter in relation to combined authority in relation to the triennial information, and that underpins this year's IS 19 work, because there was a big 3-year valuation that then sets the baseline from which the figures rolled forward for this year into 1920, and that was at the time of that the extraction that the actuary used. The full year's notional or pensionable salary details for the combined authority wasn't in the right area of the pension funds systems. They've informed the actuary of that. The actuary, I think, as our understanding, it has grossed up those figures. So what we're just going through our audit process at the moment is getting independent assurance from the actuary that they did use the grossed up figures. If they've done that, then that's fine as far as we're concerned. So we're just getting independence check from an audit perspective. But my understanding is the right information has been used. We're just waiting on that confirmation from the actuary. I know Councillor Fain, I think, asked a question around McLeod. McLeod is actually the issue that we discussed in detail last year in respect of effectively what was then I suppose an underpin that was given to the judges that then impacted on the LGPS in terms of protecting their pensions for those within 10 years of retirement. That went through the courts a couple of years ago now and was found to be unlawful. The government is now consulting on a remedy that covers all the public sector pension schemes. And what we were looking at this year was whether that remedy might have a material impact upon the figures that have been assumed in your financial statements. We don't believe it is going to be a material issue. Our view is also now that that's unlikely to be an adjusting event. So I think as part of your auditors, I think we parked McLeod for this year, and hopefully it will work its way through the system. In terms of, we mentioned the ITA unitisation. yes, we were commissioned by the pension. We have been commissioned by the pension fund to do what's agreed upon procedures. Work on that in respect of looking primarily at the cash flow data that was used to unitise the ITA pension fund. Whilst I haven't issued my report yet on that, I can confirm that what you informed today is we're not proposing to do any adverse findings from the work that we've done in relation to the unitisation. And finally, the bit that is in this report today is around an emphasis of matter that we are proposing to put in our audit opinion related to your investments in the pension fund. And I'm sure that you'll find that the councillors actually at their local authorities, not so much at the combined authority, because you don't have material assets that are valued on an existing use basis. You'll find you'll be seeing lots of material uncertainties from valuers in respect of valuation of assets at your councils. In a similar way, the pension fund invests in investment property, and the valuers of those investment properties have indicated that, as far as they are concerned, as a result of COVID-19, that you can place less reliance upon the valuations. I'm not saying the valuations have been done correctly, it's just there's greater uncertainty in those. So the pension fund has quite properly disclosed that in its financial statements, and the gross figure for the fund is around about 970 million, so approaching £1 billion worth of direct property assets. So when we look at your proportion of that, it's likely to be a material number. And I think we're just saying that you would want, well, we would recommend you reflect that fact of the pension fund disclosure in your accounts, because it does affect your net pension liability. But again, there will be no impact on our opinion. It's really saying that you've disclosed something appropriately, and we're highlighting it to a reader because we think it's important for them to know. So that's where I think on the pension fund. And I was going to I'll take questions, but Helen can maybe take you through the rest of the paper, which is where we are on the rest of the audit.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah, I think, Grant, you've done the difficult bit in terms of the pensions. The rest of the report then just picks up in terms of where we were from the last report and just taking you through. So members will recall that we talked about the land fund. And we have now reached a point where we've resolved that. We've shared a detailed paper with certainly with David and other officers. But again, we can report that that has now been resolved. And the likely amendments we already actually included in the audit findings report that members have seen previously. The group procedures now, we've also completed our work around that, and similarly we've completed our work around the operating expenditure. The sort of, in addition to the pension fund elements that Grant has already talked about, obviously we did do an element of work on going concern as part of our work in sort of June and July. We've talked a lot today about it being a fairly fast moving situation, and again we'll just update that as we move through towards signing off later in November. So it's the going concern element really, in addition to the pensions, that is the two elements that we're just going to update as we head through to that sign off point. I'm happy to take questions like Grant, but I think that's all I was really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Any questions from anybody around the room? Good. Did I hear somebody? Nope, that's fine. Grant, I think what would be helpful at the next meeting, if you could just, for ARAC, give a little bit more detail about how we performed compared to the other local authorities. The only
idea about when opinions were issued, certainly from our firm, I might not be able to give the full national picture, but I'll certainly be able to give an internal picture to you.
That's fine. I think it's just important for ARAC to be comfortable that it's asked for some benchmark information.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Linda, I think you should be entitled to the last word. If I saw your picture disappear, are you still here?
Yes, I am. I am still here.
Do you want the last word?
I suppose I just wouldn't want the fact that we have had some issues around actually getting final sign off to the audit to detract from the brilliant work that the finance team did. Ultimately, in the middle of a pandemic, the finance team still got a set of audits, accounts ready by the beginning of May, and we were there ready essentially to get signed off by the end of June. Understand all the issues that we've had around that, and the fact that, but actually these are national issues rather than them being sort of combined authority. So I don't really want it to detract the lengthy time it's taking to get signed off. I don't want it to detract at all from the brilliant work that Rachel and the team did in finance to get the accounts sorted in the first place.
I'm going to just quickly check around the room. I think, colleagues, it would be worthwhile making sure we minute that point, that we were how well finance had performed in getting everything ready for the end of June, and that it is not a CA issue, it is a national issue. Are you all happy that we note that?
Agreed, Chair. Agreed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Chair. Agreed.
Okay, Linda, you've moved into PR girl as well.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on the finance side of it? No. All right. Then, in which case, Andy turned up just dead on time, and I think we're only just a couple of minutes behind now. So you've got performance reporting, Andy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So Andy Morgan, I'm the performance manager within the strategic hub. So I just want to give you an update really on the emerging performance management and reporting capability, following on from a report that went to ARAC earlier on in the year. So I have got some slides, so let me just see if the technology works and I'll launch it on the screen. Are you all able to see those slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Has that made them a little bit bigger? So in terms of a summary, I thought it was worthwhile outlining all of the reporting that is actually being generated now from within the performance team. So you're probably all aware, at the start of the year, the strategic hub went live. Within the strategic hub, there is a performance reporting team. So this is the emerging capability that we've already got in place. So in terms of monthly reporting, we're now doing senior leadership team reporting, which is predominantly around the annual plan, but also outlines the organisational health reporting. There is a corporate management team report that we provide, which shows organisational health reporting. There is the investment board report. In terms of bi-monthly reporting and when appropriate, we report to WMCA liaison and WMCA board, and that is around the performance of the annual plan. And then 6 monthly reporting, we provide the WMCA liaison and WMCA board an update to the annual plan, the 6 month update. Also, we're proposing that we provide overview and scrutiny with that same element of annual plan reporting. And then the annual reporting is the WMCA board reporting, which is the performance at the end of the year of the annual plan. So that's the summary. I'm just going to take you into just a little bit of detail. So this is the dashboard that goes to CMT. So we had a set of indicators in place for CMT, and as a result of COVID, we've already refined some of those indicators. So I don't know how clear it is on your screen, but we're focusing particularly on people reporting. So the points earlier around the pandemic.
Sorry, not clear at all, Andy. It's not clear at all. We can't read much.
you can't. Sorry, you can't hear me.
Sorry, we can't read what's in the slide. It's
not big enough.
I will see.
I think the previous view was better, actually, Andy.
Right. I can't make it any better. Any bigger. This one.
Okay, can I just Andy, let me cut to the chase. I think what I would like to do is for this to go out relatively quickly. Tanya will send out the slides to everybody so they've had a chance to read it. But if you just, without necessarily trying to aim us at any specific part of the slide, just tell us, as you were starting to do, what the focus has been.
Okay. So the CMT measures, as I was just describing, we have updated them to outline the fact that there are a lot of people working from home, particularly in terms of health and safety. Your classic trips, slips and falls and accidents aren't as appropriate at the minute, but some of the reasons around DSC and potentially some of the sickness reasons are more appropriate. So that's the sort of thing that we are focusing on. There are measures around our building and also the ICT services that we provide, again supporting home working. In terms of SLT reporting, SLT is monthly. That focuses again on the organisational health indicators that CMT are responsible for, but additionally it reports on the annual plan performance in terms of a RAG status against milestones and a RAG status against the high-level deliverables which form the annual plan. Also monthly to SLT are the regional outcome indicators, which is some of the read across from the contribution that the annual plan makes to our regional indicators. In terms of the WMCA Leaders Liaison meeting, we provide a summary view of the annual plan indicators, and by exception, we report on amber and reg statuses with some supporting commentary that is contributing towards the annual plan. Additionally, we also report the regional outcome indicators to the Leaders Liaison meeting. And then what goes to board? There is bi-monthly reporting, 6-monthly reporting and yearly reporting. And that reporting is all around the performance of the annual plan and the state of the region indicators. So just in terms of, just a quick view over the next 6 months, just some of the things that we're hoping to grow in terms of the capability. We are working with the transformational team to enable individual performance reporting. We are doing several enhancements to some of the current dashboards that we've put into place across the CMT indicators, as I've already said. We are doing an enhancement to the investment board report, and we're also prototyping a monitoring and evaluation dashboard. All of this will feed into potentially our emerging requirements for a system-based reporting capability. So we've been in constant dialogue with our colleagues within digital and culture and IT as to how we can enable a proper reporting system driving data integrity in one version of the truth. And then the last part is an outcomes, which are more of the regional and the sort of nationally identified outcomes and outputs and outcomes. That's the end of the slides that I was presenting. Has anybody got any questions?
Before I allow any questions, can I just remind us that the ARAC's role in this is to satisfy ourselves that we have a good process in place, not to act as a judge on the performance. If there was a governance committee that was doing that, it would be oversight and scrutiny. So can I just make sure that the questions that we're asking here are about the process that we put in place, not about the detailed content of the reporting? Who had the hand up? Was it you, Ram, who was starting to talk?
No, Chair, I think I agree with you. This is the process. We need to understand that process is in place. That's all. I couldn't read anything on the screen, though. Thank you.
What I would say is, Andy, I think it would be very useful, probably in 6 months' time, maybe 12 months' time, but to come back and say the process has now matured to a constant that looks roughly like this. So that we, as ARAC, are satisfied that the process is now in place and is relatively constant and being used, but it's not for ARAC to get involved in satisfying itself about the content. I think oversight and scrutiny is the governance committee would be the one that did that. Julie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, just reflecting back on the conversations we've had with ARAC over the last year, we've talked about the structures and reporting systems we want to build and how we fill the gaps. And what I would say now is we're in a really good place where this regime is now up and running. It's still in its earliest kind of iterations, so 6 months would be a good time to come back and then just check that it's kind of running as anticipated, and I think also to come back on how the work that Andy's been progressing with IT to kind of build those core data and IT systems to support it, see how they're progressing. So I'm more than happy with that recommendation.
Thank you, Julia. Right, any questions or anybody want to raise anything? I see none. When it comes back, Julia, Andy, I think it should come back with a short summary of what has been learned about the process over the 6-month period. But strategically, as a member of SLT, Julia, I think what would be more useful for ARAC will be your insights on how it is then, what the outcomes are of the reporting being achieved in SLT and how it's being used.
Yeah,
I think that would help us a lot. Right. Any other business? I'm going to shoot around the room, and I should probably miss some of you. So if I do, Sean, anything? Louise? Anything from you? Nope. Right. Alan?
No, nothing.
Michael?
No, fine, thank you.
Julia, anything from you?
No, quite happy, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Julia, anything from you? I assume not. Alex?
No, all good, Chair.
Thank you. Ram, anything?
I'm happy with this. Thank you.
I think it's actually quite challenging for me to go around the room. So I'm just going to, I think what I will do is just say, can anybody raise their hands if they've got anything they want to raise? I see none. Right. In which case, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close, but with one final comment. I noticed that we have a founder member of ARAC sitting on here who's been off on maternity leave. I'd just like to pass